right. Welcome, everybody. This is a great show today. We've got some news coming out from both Ford and GM, basically admitting that they're not going to be able to get to Tesla's profitability and pushing out their plans until 2030. We've got some videos to share with you about that. We also have, meanwhile, we're actually getting Tesla's Model 3 getting even more IRA credits. We've got Jeff Lutz joining us today. Jeff is a supply chain manufacturing and marketing executive, and he's been with us show every Monday. Welcome, Jeff. Thank you for joining.
Good to be with you, Herbert.
This is perfect because it was actually your tweet that you sent out this morning that kind of wraps it all up. And you say, in the last week, both the CEOs of Ford and GM have come out and said that the price parity with the gas cars, ICE, and profitability that Tesla has already achieved with EVs will not be possible for them until 2030 or beyond, which is a major push out from their previous estimates of 2025 to 2027. So you kind of just point out, and we're going to go through the actual articles talking about when Ford and GM said this, which is just this weekend, both of them. And you continue to say, take note of the continued push-outs on cost goals by other auto. Prototypes are easy, but once they start trying to produce their EVs. And so this is just another comment here that we're going to go through this as the article here. And you also say this also same thing with GM. Do you want to make a quick comment here before we actually go through what actually both GM and Ford said?
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about the cost structure and all the components of a cost structure. In fact, in your show a few weeks ago, Herbert, we went through, I think, 16 different areas. And the point is you'll hear these CEOs, number one, they're kind of giving the public and financial communities a headline statement about where they're at. It doesn't mean they're not going to make progress along that way and along that trajectory. It doesn't mean there's not great people at these companies, but it does mean that their previous goals that they've been stating, which is basically the next generation of EV products coming out, the next ones that they're doing, so call it the 2025 releases, they were previously guiding the mid-single digit gross margins, and that's not even Tesla, parity. And now they're basically saying they're not going to be profitable, which I take is greater than 0% gross margin until around 2030, and they even said or beyond. So I kind of a number of things came to mind. Number one, like what was behind these promises, originally? What have they learned, and what is now becoming apparent? And all these kind of announcements have started to make more sense to me. The supercharger announcement from I guess over a week ago now. A lot of these things, and we'll get into that a little bit later on in the show. But the capital involved, and it's not only the capital involved to build EVs because they could acquire capital. It's more expensive today, but they could acquire it. But it's more about the method, and it's more about how they're actually organized as companies, and it's more about actually how they do engineering, hardware and software, and manufacturing, and just the fact that I think there was just this previous there's this thirst or drive from the fintech community to say, hey, Ford has built cars for 100 years. GM's built cars forever. Stellantis, they're smart. They'll figure it out. The bending the metal part of it wasn't the big thing, that was going to carry them in the EV. What's going to carry them in the EV is the energy solution, the battery solutions, the software that goes, and this whole process that Tesla goes through of basically reducing and eliminating waste and process steps and components. And Tesla was basically on a survival mission. Like AVs wouldn't survive unless they came at it with the most efficient approach, the flattest supply chain, and the most efficient cost structure. And it turns out, I believe that the ICE manufacturers believed this was going to be easier than they thought it would be.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's certainly looking like the competition is not coming. And, initially we saw Mary Barra being very confident and needing to boast that they're the leader, and they had all these incredible commercials. But I think they can't push that anymore, right? They're finally getting to the point where, the proverbial whatever is hitting the fan here. So let's take a look at what they actually said. So this weekend, GM CEO Mary Barra says Tesla has the lead in electric vehicles. She's admitted it. But and she doesn't see profitable 30 to 40,000 EVs until the end of the decade. So in the 30 to 40,000 range until the end of the decade, or maybe even later, she said. So she's being finally much more truthful.
She doesn't say which decade either. I'm just kidding.
I love it. Right. So this happened at the Sanford Bernstein conference. Barra commented on the current EV market and admitted that Tesla has a lead in it, but she hinted that she believes GM can catch up. So she has to say these things because obviously she wants to keep her employees excited about what they're doing, their customer base, their marketing, but clearly she can't keep that charade too longer. And then she said the lead is not permanent. Okay, good statement. She added about EV profitability. EV battery costs are still too high to build profitable mass market vehicles that sell for $30,000 to $40,000. She predicted EV and combustion vehicle costs will equalize sometime in a decade, maybe along next decade. And then this article writer said that that's a strange comment, considering GM already sells a Chevy Bolt EV at $26,500 and promised a starting price around $30,000 for the Equinox EV.
Not profitably, the Bolt, obviously.
Right. Yeah. But the Volt EV is going out of production at the end of the year. It was never clear whether or not GM was making any money of it. But the Equinox EV is coming to the market this year. And while the base version starting at $30,000, it's not expected to come out till later. So, yeah. So let's pause before we get to this one. What's your thought about what she just said?
A couple of things. When fintech says the competition is coming, their definition of competition isn't the definition that we've talked about on your show and other venues. When you're actually going to arrive as competition, you have to, number one, you have to have a cost structure. Number one, you have to have a product that compels people to buy it. Number two, you have to have an underlying cost structure that, when at scale, leads to profitability. And number three, you've got to have, the quality behind that, where it's a reliable product that lasts to consumers' expectations. And that's a box you've got to fit inside of. And I've, lived in this world in another industry, in the mobile phone industry, where you've basically got to get everything dialed into that box. You've got to get the product that people want. You've got to get the scale. You've got to get the profitability. You got to get the quality. It's basically those four major points. There's other ones, obviously, but when you're talking about product, you've got to fit inside of that box with those four things. You can't just literally come to an auto show and have the covers, removed from a clay prototype or a hand-built functioning prototype, and get the oohs and ahs and kind of walk away. There's what we're finding out is the homework wasn't there. And I would also say that you have to give credit to Tesla and Elon Musk in terms of his connection to the details. He knows these things, and he gets a lot of gets a lot of flack for missing a date or taking on these audacious goals and eventually getting to them. But you're talking now, I mean, they're going to be more than a decade late in just producing a profitable car. I mean, they should have been really in the late 2018, 2019, they should have been there already producing EVs and volumes, and certainly by the early 2020s. And now they're talking 2030 or beyond. So I think there's a number of things. When the competition arrives, those 4 points have to be there: cost, quality, scale, and the right product. And the level of attention to detail of these CEOs, of like, what did they actually know and when did they know these things, tells me when they were making these claims a number of years ago that, number one, they're being ill-informed by their teams, but number two, their ability to kind of gather all these points of data and kind of say, like, kind of put their company on a poker term, put them on a hand and say like, this is where we think we're going to be, was just not properly done. I mean, this is poor execution, at the C-suite level. And I do think that there needs to be, changes as a result. We'll see what happens, but they should figure out how to restructure their company. This is much deeper than we're going to go start up some battery factories and we're going to buy a autonomy company, Cruise, or invest in them. It's more than, just kind of farming this stuff out. And I think it all goes back to this Tesla approach of kind of all under one umbrella and really being able to control the cost structure from very detailed decisions that are made in silicon all the way to the end consumer experience. And there's not one auto company today that's actually doing that.
Yeah. So I interviewed Corey Steuben of Monroe and Associates. That video came out this weekend. Also, Joe Justice, who used to work at Tesla. And so what Corey said was that initially, Tesla, of course, started 20 years ago, but they had a lead with electric vehicles, right? About 10, 12 years ago when they had their very first, the Roadster and the Model S came out. So that's that lead. Now they had a 5 to 7 year lead. You have been saying quite a bit about how Tesla's about a generation ahead. But Corey said that he felt that 5 to 7 year lead has been shrinking over the last several years because really Tesla's been doing a lot of work on the cost savings on the manufacturing and nothing you really see on the outside of the car. But with the new unboxing method that they're now releasing, when that comes out, they're going to even separate that lead even further. So even though it's shrinking now, it's going to grow even further because of this continued work on improving manufacturing. Joe Justice believes that the lead is just continuously just expanding, beyond the 5 to 7 years because, it's things you don't see like the manufacturing. So here we have these companies saying that, they're coming and they're going to be able to produce this. They've created some cars, but they can't do it profitably. And they, like you said, it's beyond just, producing the car. There's so much work they need to do. We'll be talking about the different things that contribute to gross margin. There is an episode you and I did where we said, I think it was 18 different items of gross margin and how the car companies compare. Okay, let's continue here. So we've got Ford CEO himself saying that EV cost parity may not come until after 2030. So just excuse me here. This article is a little weird here. So he says electric vehicles may not reach cost parity with ICE vehicles until after 2030. And so he spoke at an investor conference this weekend. EVs will continue to be more expensive than their ICE counterparts until the second and third generation vehicles go into production after 2025. And then between 2030 to 2035, the cost savings will come from dramatically lower labor content because the vehicles will be simpler to build with fewer parts. We already knew that, and will be fitted with smaller batteries that use cheaper materials. We also think that distribution costs from selling EVs online, he's talked quite a bit about how the distribution of selling to dealers is really hampering them, and that's why they've kind of separated out the EV division. And he's just continuing to say that that's the case. And then he says that the software services business now has 600,000 subscribers, triple the number of a year ago.
Yeah. He's basically saying that, and he's really come to several realizations, I believe, over the last 1 to 2 years. And he's pretty good at kind of straight talking to the media and describing it. He's basically saying he's starting the Tesla playbook about a decade or maybe 12 years or more after Tesla started. He's talking about his distribution model and the cost of that distribution model all the way to like how the development work happens on the product and who actually develops the software for the seat control module versus, the air conditioning in the car, and how are these things connected? How are these teams connected? How can these teams work together across different modules to optimize for power consumption? When you're in an ICE vehicle, you're not as focused on, that active optimization for power consumption. You're focused on, the aerodynamics, for gas mileage and so forth, the weight and mass and so forth. You're focused on many things to engineer a car, but when you're doing an EV, it's a different kind of engineering where you're almost kind of merging kind of the smartphone world in with the auto world, heavily software dependent. But he's starting a playbook where basically he realizes as they build more EVs in their portfolio and that takes up more of their production volume, it's going to require less labor, active labor, direct labor on the line to build those. So now they can actually bring more modules in-house and manufacture them in-house. Because when you manufacture so you're Ford, you manufacture in a Ford factory, instead of going to that supplier and saying, look, we're going to get cost parity. I'm going to have five of you to drive that cost parity. But you're still paying them a margin. Like they're not doing the work for free. So if you can figure out how to make the seat, for example, I'll do a basic part with the fewest number of steps and the most refined process with the greatest amount of automation, why wouldn't you just want that in-house so you don't have to pay a margin to anybody? And you don't have to pay the logistics cost to bring that mass, that object into your factory. You're just bringing in the piece parts. So we can go on, but he's basically come to a number of realizations Tesla did out of survival. That's the other thing. Tesla had to do these things out of survival just to get EVs to scale and be a viable propulsion platform for automobiles. Otherwise there would be no EV if all the EVs were $60,000 to $80,000 because of battery cost, because of distributed development models, distributed manufacturing models, doing it the auto way. You'd never have an EV. And I think this is what some of the C-suite discussions may have been over a number of years of like, should we get into this? How aggressive should we be? And they were using kind of their existing models for development and manufacturing and applying those cost curves on it and saying, look, this isn't really viable. And then all of a sudden they see these EV adoption curves happening where like people really want to buy EVs and the governments are giving incentives for it. We'll talk about in a bit. And they're like, holy crap, we actually have to do this.
Yeah. I find it really, really fascinating that the history of Ford has been that they were very vertically integrated in the 1930s and so forth. When they initially came out the Model T, they did everything. They built everything. They hardly, farmed out to other vendors. And then it was in the 70s and 80s when the executives were starting to get, I think, incented to reduce, I think to get best of breed, to farm it out, and then I think to go outside of the U.S. to partner, and then sort of now it backfired on them. And then Tesla comes back to the original plan of vertically integrated. And so, these guys are struggling to they need to cut the costs, and that's going to take them so long. And that's what they're trying to do, to take their current business, but to cut the costs wherever they can. And now it's hard work, right? So I'm curious, Jeff, like, why do you think that their tone has changed? So, the nice thing about Ford is they've always been very straightforward. So why did Ford decide to be just straightforward? They've already always praised Tesla for years now. They've always said how difficult it is, the challenge for them. They've opened up their books and said, here's what our profitability is on EVs. Here's the details of the financials. Meanwhile, you've got GM just saying, oh no, we're the leader. We're way ahead of everybody. We've got 25 EVs coming up by 2025. But then now she's finally changing her tone. Why is she doing that?
Yeah, I can think of a couple of things. One is it's further time and realization in the process. So like GM battery factory number 1, I think, is up and running. And, this Equinox car is probably at the PVT stage, the pilot verification or product verification stage, which is the last stage of manufacturing. And I believe that they thought in the prior stages they were going to be able to take out more cost and realize those savings, in these final stages. And what I think they're coming to the realization of is not only are they not able to do that, but when they saw Tesla's investor day and they saw that, the Equinox, or if you look at the current Mustang from Ford, these were designed really looking at the Model 3 and maybe the Model Y as well, and in terms of like benchmarking, which is a lot of the stuff that that Corey and Monroe Associates do, which is a great thing, by the way, and this happens in other industries as well, is where you go in and you figure out like what would be the cost for you to manufacture something. And I believe that they were driving for some amount of parity, and then COVID hit. And then COVID kind of put everything on steroids in terms of like what's the true cost. And then people were just allowed to kind of like, because there was so much liquidity put into the system for consumers, auto manufacturers could raise prices without recourse, and there was no issue. And now I believe the canary in the coal mine, you saw all these OpEx reductions in their offices, in their or in the early part of this year. They knew they have a cost structure issue with EV and just even probably without EV. And that's why you see these these unforced reductions and massive amounts of people leaving Ford, GM, and Stellantis. So I believe these realizations have come over the last, call it 6 months to a year, as they advance their own products, as they realize how hard it is to make batteries and to make them at yield and make them at scale. Even Tesla has admittedly said it's very difficult right now to build their own in-house battery, which they've been working on for a couple of years ahead of Ford and GM. These aren't even custom things that they're doing, and they're finding it very difficult to do in the US. So I think it's realizations. I think the COVID piece of it caused a delay, and I think coming out of COVID and Tesla being able to do what they've recently done with pricing, and they know that there's going to be a little bit of a kind of a compression point here where Tesla's going to have their trough in margins, but with volume expanding in EV at the rate it is, those margins are going to start elevating again. And with the aggressive cost reduction campaign that Tesla's doing. So I think it's those three things that have happened. And they're like, well, maybe we could have competed, with the $50,000 and $60,000 Model 3 and Y Tesla, but now we have the $30,000 and $40,000 Model 3 and Model Y Tesla. We don't know how to compete with that. And now these guys are crazy. They're working on the $25,000 Tesla. That's probably going to be better than a 3 or Y in a couple of years. And they put in all this together. Like, okay, we don't want expectations to be too high for 25 to 27, because their cars that come out in 25 to 27 are probably going to be closer to a kind of a 3 or Y if you're just looking at hardware, not even software and not even autonomy.
Yeah, that's the problem, right? By the time they get to this point, the profitability of their cars, by that point, where's Tesla going to be? They're going to have their $25,000 car. They're going to even have greater margins. But what's happening, I think, in addition to everything you just said, is the growth of the electric vehicle adoption and the consumer demand for it is much faster than they expected. And so what's scary for many of these companies, all the European car manufacturers, the American ones, is that no one's buying them in China. And even in Europe, they are buying, they're no longer buying these brand names. They're losing market share there too. So I don't know where these guys are going to end up. It looks like that Hyundai, according to Corey Steuben of Monroe, when they did the teardowns, they think that they are the second after Tesla in terms of build quality, in terms of what their product that they're offering for electric vehicles, and the rest are really far behind. And so the Chinese manufacturers, of course, are going to be the next in line. They're coming on the attack in Europe. So I think that the European brands and the American ones are not doing as well, and they're going to suffer. So let's keep going here. I do want to talk to you about what happens when Tesla's plans for even further reduction in prices for both the revised Model 3 and the new compact car. When that happens, what will happen? Meanwhile, let's talk about this, which is, again, this thing in this weekend. Jim Farley appeared on a podcast, and he talked about how their software is what's holding them back. It basically, to survive, they need to learn how to be software companies for the first time. So let me go ahead and play that little clip here.
If I explain to the listeners how crazy our software system is and why it's so difficult for legacy car companies to get software right, well, I'll do it very quickly.
Yeah.
So to save probably $500 a vehicle, or let's say 350 quid a vehicle.
Yeah.
We farmed out all the modules that control the vehicles to our suppliers because we could bid them against each other. So Bosch would do the body control module, someone else would do the seat control module, someone else would do the engine control module.
Right.
And we'd have about 150 of these modules of semiconductors all through the car. The problem is the software are all written by, 150 different companies, and they don't talk to each other.
Right.
And so even though it says Ford on the front,
yeah,
I actually have to go to Bosch to get permission to change their seat control software.
Right.
So
Wow.
even if I had a high-speed modem in the vehicle and I had the ability to write their software, it's actually their IP. And I have 150, we call it the loose confederation of software providers, 150 completely different software, programming languages, all the structure of the software is different. It's millions of code, and we can't even understand it all. So, that's why at Ford, we've decided in the second generation product to completely insource the electrical architecture.
Right.
And to do that, you need to write all the software yourself. But just remember, car companies haven't written software like this.
Yeah.
Ever. They've never written software. So we're literally writing how the vehicle operates, the software to operate the vehicle for the first time ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's great, isn't it, to actually hear it directly from the CEO of Ford saying that. And of course, it's not just Ford. Almost, I think every single auto company have the same issue. If you're creating the ICE cars, only if you created the EV from the ground up, because an EV is, they start as software first, right? So, wow, love to that he just very, very, honestly, transparently said it the way it is.
Yeah, we talked about it on your show, Herbert. A lot of attention with vertical integration is always focused on manufacturing, and they see a robot, building something in the factory, and Tesla has been known for their vertical integration in their factory. And what we talked about, I think, in two weeks ago, was what people don't talk enough about is the vertical integration they have in engineering, and it's very deep. And we could have a whole show on the AI portion of this as well, because that's where it's going to become critical. But when you're thinking about the examples that Jim Farley gave, the seat control module, all of those interfaces are, Tesla does all this work in-house, and they do all the software integration in-house. And every one of those modules is on a power consumption or current drain budget. Everyone's, not only are they on a budget, they need to be on an improvement path, I'm sure, of like, how do we get better performance out of you in the next generation vehicle, or even in the current generation, by over time, how do we get better performance out of you? And that vertically, everything being under one roof, and having not only you can't just have a room full of software engineers. You have to have a room full of leadership that directs them of like, this is how we write code. This is how we do it. This is how we do things efficiently. This is how we do integration. This is how we do testing. This is how we do bug fixes. And that's a hard thing for these companies that don't do this traditionally. Now, they do have software engineers in their company. There's no question about it. But they don't have it at the scale, the number of lines of code, and the number of interfaces that need to be basically developed from a software perspective and coded up. That's all vertically integrated. So that vertical integration in manufacturing is going to be key. And what Tesla added in the last 2 years, 3 years, or maybe more now, you have to look at when it went in development. Their whole autonomy chip, they've brought a whole hardware. They've hired a whole hardware chip design team to develop that hardware, and they do hardware and the layer one software for that silicon. They're that's what NVIDIA does. And then they farm it out to TSMC or Samsung to fab the chip in mass production. Tesla is doing that in-house. So guess what? If there's some safety critical element for that needs to be controlled inside of that autonomy chip, guess what? that safety engineer who's sitting in the lab can walk over, to the silicon team and have they both wear Tesla badges, and they can have the conversation saying, look, this is what I need to achieve, this goal. Whereas if you're buying this silicon, off the market, you're getting what everybody else is getting. And then if you're NVIDIA, for example, who do you listen to? Like, who do you take feedback from in terms of all the auto OEMs? They're all going to have different requirements. So this is where this whole element, this whole vertical integration element, not only of like the physical modules in the car, but all the way down to the base layer of the silicon, is overlooked. And it's going to become really super evident with autonomy. But I think it's already starting to become evident today.
Yeah. This is so classic disruptive technology. It's very rare, if any. It's hard to come up with an example of where a legacy incumbent company built for a certain industry in the past, a new disruptive technology comes that somehow they're able to adjust and become that new entity. In this case, it's software, or first electric vehicles, and then it's a software, and then eventually it's going to be full self-driving. Who's going to be able to catch up? And I'm betting, that's why I'm making my bet in the stock market here, that the traditional companies, anybody who made internal combustion engine, they will not be able to compete. Just not going to happen. Not going to happen, because you just heard Ford talking about that this is a software company. They can't even make changes to make the seat move. Well, why Bosch? It's so weird. But they partnered with Bosch because they won the bid or whatever it is. 150. They're just not going to win. The companies that will catch up and win is the Chinese companies that are funded, that were born pure EVs. And the other pure EVs, they just can't succeed because the sheer cost of creating a car, and they can't get to profitability. And the time that they're doing it now, when you have competitors that are able to, just reduces your chance to sell in the place, the market you wanted to sell. So their timing was wrong. So really at the end of the day, it's going to be the Chinese manufacturers and Tesla. And there's going to be many Chinese manufacturers. It's going to be very much Android, iPhone scenario. What do you comments on what I just said there? But we can.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the this is one of the big areas in when I have my work hat on, my consulting firm. When companies bring me in and say, "How should I design my supply chain? What should I do internally? What should I buy? What should I make versus what I should buy?" And there's a whole process, and it's not something you can just read in a textbook and apply it to any company. It's something you've really got to go through the analytics, the information of like what's proprietary, what's IP, what's important to you, what's important to your consumers, and then what are your cost goals. And this whole Bosch example that Jim gave, which is a really good example, they'll go farm that seat control out to 4 or 5 different companies and have a bidding process.
Even they farm it out.
And guess which company? Guess what the company is going to win. One of the factors that they're going to win on is the amount of software that they will not allow you to control or have control over as an OEM. They're going to want to lock it up themselves. They want to have the least amount of change. They want to have the most amount of volume on it. The supplier that's going to get that award is the one to have the most volume that goes out to everyone else, which gives everybody else parity, but it gives you the least amount of control as an OEM. Mm-hmm. So very wonky discussion, but now take that and apply it to 100 other different modules, and you'll realize why they're having a bit of trouble competing.
Okay, so much to talk about there. But in the meantime, while we're talking about Ford and GM finally admitting that they're having real difficulties, here we have Tesla able to take full advantage of the IRA now. So they announced this weekend that all Model 3 vehicles in the US now qualify for the full $7,500 EV tax credit. In the past, some of the Model 3s would only be able to do half of that. The rear-wheel drive in the long range could only do $3,750, but they were able to kind of source the batteries a little bit differently so that it actually qualifies for the IRA. So just you can see here that the new vehicles now, all Model 3 variants qualify for this. This is a big deal because this is the Model 3, which was already the cheapest version of cars Tesla was selling. And now with yet another 3,500 or 3,250, that really just separates it further. And so Omar from Homar's catalog said, here's a Tesla Model 3. $38,770. And then if you apply the federal income tax credit, and the states themselves have their own state tax credit, now you can buy a Model 3 for under $30,000 after incentive. This is we're not even talking about the savings for maintenance and service and gas. We're just talking about straight out the door. It's already under $30,000. And in Colorado, it's a $5,000 state incentive, so it's $26,000. And then Sawyer kind of create the list. Take a look at this list in Vermont, Massachusetts, and if you go down the list, look at all these different states that are offering additional EV incentives. Look at that.
Yeah, Illinois got one too. It's on and off. They take like a month off here or there, but they have a $4,000 Illinois credit. And the Illinois one, they'll actually send you a check, I think, within 90 days or something after you purchase. It's not a tax rebate. When these rebates go away from the tax rebate and they can actually move it to point of sale, because right now everybody's still driving off the lot with the MSRP price. But when they can drive off the lot with the rebate in the price, that's when this, I think, it goes to the moon. That starts January 1st for the federal incentive.
Gotcha. So by January 1st, instead of having to wait a year for your tax credit in your tax returns, you can get it right off the bat. You don't have to pay for it. So,
because there's people today, they're like, do I qualify? I'm not sure I qualify. Do I want to take the risk? Like, what if I go to my tax professional next year and they say, hey, you didn't read this fine print. So there's people that aren't really probably participating in it. So when it's actually at the point of sale, I think it becomes really powerful.
Yeah. This is why this matters. And so this IRA, the Federal Inflation Reduction Act that's been approved and passed, it applies to all cars, all EVs, electric vehicles that make it. And Tesla is going to be able to take advantage of this and it's going to be the biggest winner. There's going to be $41 billion in credits by the end of 2032, Bloomberg estimates, thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act. So you can see here that Tesla is in the black, GM is in the green, and Ford is in the gray. So Tesla in 2023, basically it's mostly Tesla and GM. And as it goes along, you can see that it's mostly Tesla that's going to get the majority of this. This is why what we just talked about matters. When you hear both Ford and GM saying that they've delayed their production of their EVs, or if they can't get profitability until 2030, they're certainly not going to rush out creating more electric vehicles at this point.
The black bar will grow.
Yeah,
that volume will go to the black bar. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, this estimate may actually, this is just their estimate of what they did this before they heard GM and Ford say they've changed their estimates.
The green and the gray will shrink. The black bar will grow.
Yeah. And so this IRA credit is so beneficial to Tesla, but again, it's not a bailout for Tesla, as many people will try to say. It's trying to motivate you to create electric vehicles. And unfortunately, none of the American companies, and they don't actually build the cars in the US. They don't build the batteries in the US. Tesla is the number one. Everything they built in the US and they sell in the US was created in the US, including the batteries. And so it's like they are more American than any of these guys.
Correct. And I actually believe the IRA was the government's bailout for auto. And Elon was basically saying, like, we don't want this. We don't need it. We can compete without it.
Yep.
But if you look at some of the vehicles, like there's Jeep Wrangler, there's basically vehicles with 7 kilowatt-hour batteries, hybrids that are getting this full award. Lincoln, I think Lincoln has a Navigator. There's a Jeep Wrangler version hybrid. These are cars with very small batteries getting the full award. And I believe that was the government, like, look, this is all we're going to probably be able to do for you. This is a lot. And then this goes directly to the consumer, but allows you to, to get more volume. I don't know what they're going to be able to do after this. When you have this IRA run and you have billions of dollars coming out of the federal government, and then Ford and GM, if they get into real, because these leases are maturing now. And I mean, at some point, are these companies, more so GM, maybe ticking time bombs? And my point is there going to be another bailout? Is it possible with the IRA and another? I don't know. Will the government say, can we really afford to be doing all these things for the auto industry in the U.S. And by the way, this is one of the reasons, things that people don't get about the U.S. auto industry. I don't believe it will ever be allowed for a China auto manufacturer, a state-sponsored China auto to sell in the U.S.
What?
State-sponsored. So like a BYD.
But they're allowing them to go to Europe. I mean, you know, the Chinese companies are basically attacking Europe and other countries, but not yet the U.S. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't believe. I mean, I know that they're allowed to import and build, actually do final assembly on electric buses here, but I believe this IRA is a protectionist. It's one of the most protectionist policies I've ever seen out of our government, and I would be surprised if they would allow Chinese state-sponsored auto manufacturers to sell in the U.S.
If they did that, China would retribute and
but there's a reason they haven't. There's a reason that they haven't up to this point. So it's not. I mean, right now they're making pretty good cars. I don't know if they're gonna. I don't know what kind of safety standards they're gonna pass, but I think it's either going to be a very long time, or in my prediction, not in our lifetimes, that we'll see them to actually producing cars here. But we'll see.
Okay. Well, that's what they'll do, is they'll ask them to produce the cars in the U.S. I mean, the U.S. has done that all the time. They've got other brands coming in and having to create factories here. Okay, we'll see what happens. But again, just gives me reassurance knowing what Elon was just in China, pressing the flesh, meeting with 6 different ministers, treated with red carpet, and they're doing very, very well in China. So that's good news. So when you think about all of the new IRA, this article from Clean Technica, Paul Fossey decided to redo this analysis. Now that you've got the Model 3 getting increased IRA to $7,500 credit, to really think about the life cycle cost again. So when it first came out, I'm not going to read all this, and I'm not going to go through the article. You can read it when you find it. It's a very good, well done article. But basically, that they said that when they first, when they first came out with the original, the 3,750 amount, then they had done this analysis of comparing Tesla Model 3 against the Corolla. And it was very competitive against the Corolla when you add in the fuel and depreciation savings. But now that it has ability to get the whole full 7,500, he decided to compare it to the cheapest car available in the United States today, the 2023 Mitsubishi Mirage that sells for $16,245. Comparing the Model 3, which is twice as much upfront, against the Mitsubishi Mirage. Remember, we saw those prices at $30,000.
Yep. But
remember how with even the credits you can get down to $27,000. But let's compare it with the cheapest car available in the U.S. Guess what? So I'm not going to walk you through this, but basically this is kind of the analysis he did for the total cost of ownership to own the Mitsubishi Mirage, and then he compared it against a Model 3, and you can see that includes things like taxes, it includes fuel, repairs, insurance, maintenance. If you add in all of that for a 5-year breakdown, here's what you get. And they use Edmunds data, which he felt was very reliable. And basically the cost of ownership for a Mitsubishi Mirage, even though it started off at $16,000, is $31,000. And the cost for the Model 3 rear-wheel drive, while it started at $37,000, it is down to $32,000. And that's just with the $7,500 tax credit. If you add in the other state tax credits that we just showed you guys, it's going to be cheaper. And so, when I look at this, it's actually pretty conservative, I think, because I'm going, maintenance costs and repairs is only a $4,000 difference. It's actually, it's a 2,000. What is it? It's weird. I'm sorry, I'm getting confused here. Yeah. What? How can the repairs cost more on the Model 3 than the than the Mirage?
I mean, this analysis is pretty fair to ICE, and it's already showing parity yeah.
This pisses me off. Tell me the last time I had to bring in my ICE car to repair and it cost me less than $1,000. I mean, sorry. Okay. Anyways, and then $2,000 for maintenance of the Model 3. I'm sorry, where did that come from? anyways,
Yeah, it's only getting better.
Yeah. The big number, of course, is the depreciation. So the Model 3, when they took a look at the depreciation of the Model 3, it's not as bad as the ICE cars. Of course, these ICE cars are gonna plummet. If you buy an ICE car today, good luck. Good luck selling it in 5 years. I mean, 5 years from now, who's gonna want to buy the ICE car? It's just not gonna be the same competitive market it is today. So their depreciation is going to be much faster, and the EVs are going to be higher. And then the thing about the Model 3s, as we know, is they last for so long. They last for 10 plus years, and it's just and then imagine when you have additional software updates that give the car new features, including, of course, some version of full self-driving, and even if it's just a safety version, why wouldn't you buy the Model 3 5 years from now if it has additional safety features than these cars? We're there. We are there. Tesla is already at price parity, if not better. And then this weekend is the time when we heard GM and Ford admit that they're not going to be able to get the price parity to ICE cars until 2030, and certainly not going to be able to get Tesla's profitability today. And so what happens when they release the compact car? What happens when they release the revised Model 3? So the revised Model 3, the rumors is going to come out basically in a month or so, because it's already in production in the China production lines. Are you not expecting that the price of the Model 3 will go down even further because they're going to achieve even greater cost savings, and so they can maintain the same margin? They can reduce the price by $5,000 or whatever.
Yeah, and it's at a quarterly run rate, the Model Y is already the highest volume model of any car, ICE or EV, produced in the world already. And by the end of the year, it'll be over 1.2, 1.3 million units. That volume for suppliers, for Tesla's factories, that is going to be another check box in terms of EV cost parity and basically going below, because that's a $50,000 car that's in higher production volume than $20,000 to $30,000 ICE cars today. So yeah, your question's right. What happens when they release the 25K car? Every segment or price tier that Tesla has participated in, they've decimated the competition when you look at it from a volume perspective. And so what's going to happen when they go down to that next volume tier? And then the Model Y will just continue in reductions. The new Model 3 will just continue in reductions as well.
Yeah. I know you got to leave soon, so I just wanted this last bit here, which is very big news. Good news for China. Sales of Teslas. Tesla Giga Shanghai reached 77,695 wholesale units in May, the month of May. Wholesale is when you sell it both in domestic sales and the export combined. And this beautiful chart that Roland always produces shows you by the first month. I'm sorry, the green is the first month of the quarter. The yellow, orange is the second month of the quarter, and the red is the third month of the quarter. And you can see that
off to a good start.
They're just doing really well. Everything is just rising as much as they compared to previous quarters, equivalent quarters. So if you're trying to compare the second month of Q2 against the second month of Q2 of last year. Okay.
And by the way, when you look at these charts, and Roland does a great job with these charts, but one of the things that won't come out is like what's going on in the region that they're actually shipping to. Is total auto up or down? And I believe in Europe, it's actually down currently. So Tesla's actually, Tesla's actually increasing market share in many of these regions when total volume is lower. So, great charts, great data, great month of May, great start for the quarter.
No, it's going really, really well. And the other competitors are struggling. What we need to do is take a look at the Chinese manufacturers. But even then, as we've kept saying, it doesn't matter. What matters is how well Tesla produces their cars. There's room. The growth is so high that there's room for multiple competitors. It's just not going to be the American, or very likely the German companies are going to become very niche. They're going to just be like the Porsche will survive, but very small numbers. But it's changing. The world is changing very quickly, and Tesla is going to be one of the top. It doesn't matter if there's others. So,
Great speaking
last
with
comments? Okay, thank you so much, Jeff.
No.
You're fantastic. Please follow Jeff on Twitter at the Jeff Lutz. Just amazing follow. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. See you later.